Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Truog, Associate Director of the Center for Financial Security, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is entitled Integrating Financial Education into Traditional Family Support Services. This webinar is part of the Family and Financial Security webinar series, sponsored by a grant from the UW-Madison School of Human Ecology Beckner Endowment. Our presenter today is Christy Schuch-Slack, Professor and Associate Director, UW-Madison School of Social Work. Our discussants today are Margaret Sherrodden, Professor of Social Work, University of Missouri-St. Louis, and Research Professor, Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis. And we also have Jonathan Mintz, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get into the presentation. During today's webinar, if you have any technical difficulties, please call 1-800-442-4614. And to submit questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar, locate the dark gray bar near the top of Media Site, click on the Ask a Question icon, and a window will open. Please type your name, email address, and your question and hit send. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Christy.
Thank you for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak about this topic. This presentation is based on joint work with Lawrence Berger and Michael Collins, who've been involved in a family support intervention and in La Crosse County, and I'm going to talk today a little bit about lessons learned with that experience. And it's going to focus specifically on a child maltreatment prevention initiative, and so we're going to apply our discussion to that particular context. And I'm going to start just talking a little bit about what I mean by family support services. Family support services really constituted a movement in social welfare services during the 1980s and 1990s. And what I mean by traditional family support services are grassroots organizations that are really they're developed with the sole purpose of supporting families in their own family-defined needs. And this list here just gives you a sense of some of the characteristics of family support agencies. Most of them are community-based. They have a strength-based philosophy when working with families. They encourage families to define their own needs. There's often no set time frame or service intensity. The services are entirely voluntary and require that families ask for help. There's often no specialized training or credentials in terms of a professional degree in delivering these types of services. And with respect to child maltreatment prevention, many family support agencies are heavily focused on parenting interventions. With this movement in the 1980s and 90s, there's a broad market for services, but one of the challenges with family support services is that they're often not successful at attracting people who don't know they need help. When we think about evidence-based family support prevention models or interventions in this context, it is fair to say that most family support models of service are not evidence-based, and this is not to mean that they don't work. It's just to mean that they haven't been evaluated rigorously. Family support models have a philosophy of service that includes a wide-held belief that you don't turn families away who ask for help. So it's very difficult to evaluate in a rigorous way whether certain interventions in this context are actually effective at achieving the goals they're intended to achieve. There are a few examples of family support type interventions that have been rigorously evaluated. Things like home visiting programs, Head Start are a couple of examples where there have been experimental evaluations to determine whether they're effective. And one of the challenges in evaluating the efficacy and the effectiveness of these types of models is that most of the time the interventions that take place in a family support service agency sound really good. And what we have to realize is that what sounds good doesn't always work. And we need to understand better for which families things work best for, and in an era of really scarce resources, if we're picking the right interventions. So to sum up, services to at-risk populations that are based on family support models will often lack a coherent model of intervention, and this links back to the fact that most aspects of the intervention are defined by families' requested needs. They often lack evidence of impact and are often resistant to evaluating impact in a rigorous sense, again linking back to the philosophy of service. And in the child maltreatment prevention arena, the comfort zone really is often around parenting knowledge, behaviors, parent-child interactions, and the like. So I'm going to use a specific case example in the child maltreatment prevention arena. And this particular model, which I'll describe in more detail in a few slides, is intended to address the phenomenon of child maltreatment showing a historical and pretty consistent association with poverty and low income. This slide just goes over some of the findings from the literature with respect to that relationship. There are references in this presentation at the end to many of the studies that are referenced in the presentation. So low-income families we've known for a long time are overrepresented in child protective services systems and in out-of-home care populations. There have now been 4 national incidence studies of child abuse and neglect in the U.S., and all 4 of these studies have shown a strong inverse correlation with income. Child maltreatment report rates are highest in communities with high poverty rates and high unemployment rates. Receipt of different public assistance benefits is predictive of CPS involvement. And there's a strong correlation between, there was a strong correlation between welfare assistance and child protection caseloads prior to the 96 welfare reforms. So all of these descriptive findings don't speak to a causal understanding of the role of poverty. They simply speak to a correlation. One of the key questions in intervening with families who are struggling with poverty around issues related to child maltreatment prevention is that it's sometimes difficult to tease out what types of struggles are more related to poverty versus parenting. So markers of both poverty and parenting struggles predict maltreatment, and this is particularly true for child neglect, a specific form of maltreatment. But parenting characteristics do not appear to explain the links between poverty and maltreatment. So if you have strong correlations between various indicators of poverty and child abuse and neglect, when you adjust for parenting factors, those associations between poverty and maltreatment do not go away. And this suggests that there are independent effects of both poverty and parenting. I want to just make a point here and make sure everybody understands that when I'm talking about this relationship between poverty and maltreatment, I'm not saying that most families who are struggling with poverty maltreat their children. This is not the case. So families in poverty constitute a large group, of which a very small group end up becoming involved in child protective services systems. The specific intervention that I'm going to apply our discussion to is called the Milwaukee Community Response Program Model. We first piloted this community response model in La Crosse County, and some of the findings that I'll talk about today stem from that pilot. My colleagues Lonnie Berger and also Maria Canchan and Michael Collins are preparing to implement this model in Milwaukee County, along with the Children's Trust Fund and in cooperation with the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. This particular model is focused on providing economic supports to families. So it's designed to answer the question of whether there's any prevention that can be bought if you just intervene around economic issues with families. And there are 3 components to this particular model. One involves linking families to benefits and economic resources through a comprehensive assessment of what they're eligible for and what they may not be getting, and advocacy with accessing those benefits. I'll skip over to the bottom bubble here. Another pillar of this model is that there are flexible funds to provide emergency assistance on a one-time basis for families that are struggling with urgent economic needs. And then the middle pillar has to do with assisting families with financial decision making. And this particular aspect involves intensive training of the workers that are delivering the intervention to indirectly help families with making decisions that can help them save additional money or have more money at their disposal at the end of each month. So those three pillars together constitute the economic support intervention in question. And in this example, the target population is families who are reported to Child Protective Services systems, but their cases are closed because the risks don't rise to a high enough level. It's a rather short service duration, approximately 8 weeks, and families are allowed to re-engage if they need additional assistance. So the middle pillar, the assistance with financial decision-making, involves these types of activities. Working with clients who are unbanked and need a more efficient means of paying bills, reducing unnecessary fees associated with check cashing places and late fees, helping clients prioritize those bills so that they can avoid the highest fees, addressing debt issues and credit problems, planning for expenses that are likely to occur, avoidance of predatory lenders, and then assistance with budgeting, saving, and establishing financial goals. There were several implementation challenges, and we worked with a great team in a county that has a very strong network of providers for assisting families struggling with poverty. So really this particular intervention was implemented in the best situation possible. And we were very open and honest with each other, the research team as well as the workers, in communicating about what the challenges were. So some of these challenges come from those ongoing conversations with workers and from our own observations. So there was definitely a switch from a comfort zone in which, under the former model, workers emphasized parenting interventions, to focusing on systematically intervening with families around economic support issues. In the previous model that existed with this particular agency, oftentimes the financial issues that came up with families were deferred to other service silos, and workers were not typically in a position to advocate on behalf of the families or to question these other silos in terms of what they were able to assist families with. There was also a lot of discussion about the terminology around financial decision making, and we started out using the term financial literacy, and this was really viewed as something that has more middle class relevance. So we ended up using the term financial decision making in this particular context. There was also a switch from a comfort zone that embraced family-defined needs to one in which there was a requirement to assess for economic struggles. And sometimes what we found is that families didn't know what they needed with respect to financial assistance. They may not be aware of certain benefits that are available to them, so didn't know to ask about them. They may not be aware that there's other options for managing their finances. And so being able to probe in those areas was a switch from a comfort zone around parenting issues. There was also a switch from a comfort zone in which relationship building was central. So we implemented this model with the intent of it being a 3 to 6 week intervention originally. But what we found was that workers really felt they needed more time to engage with families and establish a relationship based on trust so that some of these financial issues could be more readily disclosed. And this whole area of financial decision making was really new territory for the workers involved. So there was a steep learning curve, and we had to revisit that learning curve at several points. This is just an example of a scale that we adapted from something called the Everyday Stressors Index, which was developed by Lynn Hall and colleagues. And we adapted it to fit a longer list of financial strains. But we found that it worked really well in this intervention. It seemed to have good internal reliability and was predictive of several outcomes. And this is just briefly a distribution of the scale responses. Several other empirical findings. Participants' reports of benefit receipt were low relative to their reported monthly income levels, which really suggested to us that there was room for improvement in accessing benefits. 2/3 of participants believed that their credit ratings were very poor or poor. 80% had at least one financial goal, but most often this was related to housing and paying off bills. And levels of economic stress based on the scale that I just showed you were strongly associated with having no financial goals. Several observations from workers in reaction to this intervention. Workers found that there were several legitimate reasons that families gave for not pursuing benefits for which families were eligible. For instance, concerns that if a family increased their income, they may become ineligible for benefits they were receiving elsewhere. This quote was from a worker in reaction to this terminology around financial literacy. It really means something different for this service population. This is an observation from one of the workers. So most families in poverty have daily, weekly goals regarding their finances, such as paying for groceries, gas money, paying bills, and they do not think long-term towards building credit, paying off debt, avoiding late fees, etc. They focus on surviving one day to the next, not long-term impacts of their behavior. And so I think there's still room for us to learn how we engage families around some of those longer-term issues once some of the shorter-term issues are resolved. So some challenges and opportunities moving forward. One of the biggest challenges, I think, in today's economic context and policy context is there really is no clear economic safety net for families with low incomes. There's economic insecurity writ broadly right now. There's no institutionalized emergency assistance options for families. Reasonable quality housing is limited with respect to access. There's very few family-friendly low-wage jobs, although the Earned Income Tax Credit does help some families reach a living wage. There's limited subsidized child care, particularly that of high quality. And overall, the system for helping families with low incomes is very fragmented and categorical. Public benefits central to quote-unquote financial literacy in low-income service populations. I think that financial decision-making when working with this population must have as one of its tenets assisting families with navigating this very complicated network of public benefits. The rules are always changing. They're implemented differently in different places, and this has to be part of the decision-making that goes on with respect to families struggling with low income. This slide just gives you some of the take-up rates of the more common public benefits that families may seek to access. This slide, which I won't go through in detail, gives an example of a particular family, what their financial situation is, what expenses they have each month, and what money is coming in, followed by a slide that shows how much additional money could be available to that family if they were to access several of these other benefits they're not currently receiving. So you can see just by looking at the red highlighted areas that there is room for helping this family in a meaningful way with respect to their monthly income. And if you think about that in a cumulative sense over many months, this could really be of a great benefit to this particular family. Short-term financial success is also central. So the long-term stuff we know is important, and we need to learn better how to accomplish some of those long-term goals. But dealing with these short-term financial successes is also central, delivering these kinds of services in a family support model. So, for example, unbanked families may be able to use prepaid credit cards to pay bills, so they avoid the ability to overdraft and incur large fees. It also saves them time and money if they are used to paying bills in person, if they have a means of doing so over the phone. And some of these small changes can translate into meaningful short-term savings. We need to rethink how to train the family support workforce. And this is not a criticism by any means of the existing family support workforce. I think part of the issue is that this is a territory, financial decision-making, that truly is still unfamiliar. In schools of social work, we don't typically teach this kind of curriculum, and you find a lot of social workers in these types of agencies and settings. We may explore things like financial literacy certificate programs to complement different curricula already in place. We need to learn a lot more about how to engage families around financial issues. So the workers in La Crosse were expert at engaging families around parenting issues, but it was new territory to try to engage families around some of these financial issues, and we had some struggles there. Assessing for economic stress and identifying unnecessary expenditures is an area that a lot of these types of child maltreatment prevention agencies don't typically explore. Empowering families to think longer term about financial goals, and trying to develop an understanding of the causal role of economic stress in many adverse family outcomes, so not just with respect to child maltreatment. So to sum up, I think we have begun to struggle with this, and we gave this a full force effort in La Crosse and are about to do so in Milwaukee. But we're really still learning how to most effectively achieve this in a family support type setting. And I'm hoping that our discussants will be able to shed further light on how we might improve in that regard.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Just before we move on to Margaret, could you quickly share again the name of the economic stress level measurement tool?
It's called the Everyday Stressors Index, and we adapted it quite a bit. So the original tool will look different than the one I had.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And also, I just want to let everyone know that today's PowerPoint presentations will be posted on the CFS website by the end of business today, and that's cfs.wisc.edu, and we'll have the whole archived webinar on the webpage within 1 week. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Margaret Sheridan. Margaret?
Hi, thank you so much, Nicole. Christy, I think this is exactly the kind of research that the field needs at this point, as financial services workers are asked to address increasingly complex financial issues, especially in today's times of economic crisis. I think what I'll do is just review very quickly what I'll talk about in case I don't have quite enough time to finish. I'll basically make 2 points. One is that our definition of what we call building financial capability in low-income households entails much of what Christy is talking about, including both financial education, financial guidance and advice, as well as delivery of quality financial services to low-income households. And this whole, as Christy has just very aptly pointed out, raises many questions, both for the field, the practice field, but also for the financial services, the family services, educational institutions. So, first slide, the first substantive slide. So, research suggests that despite many obstacles, the poor families are active financial managers. They frequently know where every penny goes. They use mental and physical accounting to track their money. They often use resources very creatively, not always in an accepted way, but creatively. They set aside small amounts of money for emergencies, and when given the opportunity, our research suggests that they save for long-term opportunities. I work with individual development account research, and we have a lot of success stories when the right opportunities are available. Next slide. But they need more knowledge and resources, as Christy has just pointed out. Like most people, low-income families have inadequate knowledge and skills for handling increasingly complex financial management and planning decisions. And we see that in a recent financial capability survey by FINRA. Families often lack numeracy skills and often make short-term or short-sighted economic decisions. Planning ahead is more difficult. But in addition, low-income families have insufficient and irregular income and financial supports, and I think Christy's point that she just made about the context that we're in right now has made this even more difficult. They often lack access to quality financial services and information. victims of unregulated financial services, and they often don't benefit from the kinds of asset-building opportunities that middle-class and upper-middle-class families benefit from. Next slide. In other words, financial knowledge and behavior are not enough that we need to, in order to address financial vulnerability in low-income households, we have to not only provide financial education and advice, but also real opportunities for people to act in their best financial interests. And I just like to point out a quote, a woman that we talked to in our savings research, who said, sort of at the end of the interview, she said, "We need more keys, we need more tools put in our hands. We need, show me the arena, give me some access to the arena." And I think she nicely points out that not only does she need more knowledge, but she needs access. Next slide. So we talk about this in terms of financial capability as both an individual and a structural idea that combines the ability to act, one's ability to act based on knowledge, skills, confidence, and motivation, but also the opportunity to act through access to beneficial financial benefits, services, and products. Next slide. This requires that family support workers, human service workers, have financial capability themselves and the ability to intervene using these skills. We taught a class, it was almost 10 years ago now, I think, to social work students, and one of the things they said was, I don't feel very comfortable addressing financial services and financial education because I don't understand it myself. I don't understand many of the issues that are facing me. And I think this is much like teachers who are asked to teach financial education who say, I'm happy to have the students learn this, but I don't feel I'm the one to be teaching it. So we clearly need more preparation in higher education. Next slide. So what are some of the potential roles for family service professionals? The first three, I think, are the ones that Christy responded to in most detail, and this is probably what most family support workers are going to be doing. Economic advocacy, such as how to get public benefits and other kinds of services that families need, guidance in financial decision-making, coaching and advice. Michael Collins has done a lot of the seminal work on this. Financial training and education. But I think then we also need to, as family service professionals, go on to help inform and design and test financial products and services, especially for financially vulnerable groups. So victims of domestic violence will have financial needs that are quite different than perhaps people who are living with disabilities or children who are in the CPS system. And this is something that financial services workers can have, I think, an important voice to play. And I think that Jonathan Mintz will talk about this in just a minute. Policy advocacy. We now have a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I think family support workers and family services workers need to become active in that. We need to learn how to do that and move towards policies that will help support families in areas of healthcare and housing in particular, where families become so financially vulnerable. And then research. It's very helpful to have family services workers involved in this. The kind of research that Christy points out is so important for us to be involved in. Next slide. Just very briefly, and I'll finish up here. Financial services and family support services, financial issues and family support services really has evolved over the last century, and especially today, turning back to particular interest in financial issues has really been a catalyst. Has been the economic crisis. Next slide. So, how do we put the financial back into family support services? At the turn of the last century, this was one of the main things that human services workers did. So as we reopen that chapter, it raises many questions. Let me just talk very briefly about three of them. One is, what kind of financial training, both including the theory as well as knowledge and skills, should family support professionals receive? What kind of curriculum? Who will teach it? I don't think we have the answer to that. I think there's some very important experiments. The University of Maryland, the New York schools, and various others have been pioneering some of this work. What are the appropriate roles for family support professionals and other professionals and volunteers? I think we probably need to be thinking carefully about multidisciplinary teams. And then one other issue that I think that Karen Appleyard and Rowlingson in the UK have raised the issue of the kinds of sensitive issues regarding household financial management. Money is a tough topic. How we decide to spend, is it on a quinceañera? Is it on the Hajj pilgrimage? Is it on family reunions? These are subject of debate. So what kinds of values and skills people have, and the values around saving for the future, which is also a very value-laden kind of approach. So I'll stop there and look forward to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Before we go on to Jonathan, I would like to encourage our participants, please submit your questions because we will have time for Q&A today. So, Jonathan, we'll turn things over to you.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to hear this kind of thinking and the research and the receptivity on the social services end. I come to this issue from the financial empowerment programming end of this ledger, and am excited to talk a little bit about our experience with successes in this field and our current work and our thinking regarding the kinds of integration that we've been talking about so far today. If you look at the next slide, just very briefly, the context of where I'm coming from, I'm the commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs. We generally regulate fairness in the consumer marketplace. We do that through licensing and enforcement and outreach and education. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Mayor Bloomberg put together a blue ribbon panel a few years back that tried to look at innovative approaches to fighting poverty, and the obvious came up, which was, quote, more financial education. But when the City Hall dug deeper and said, well, where exactly in city government do we do financial education, the answer, which may not surprise most people on the phone, but was a bit of a shock internally, was, well, city government doesn't really do that sort of thing. And from that realization came the challenge to my agency, which was to try to figure out where we could bring the unique opportunities and powers of government into this mix. It led to the creation of something called the Office of Financial Empowerment within my agency, and you can see here on the slide our basic mission that plays off of our core financial protection and consumer protection work regarding educating, empowering, and protecting New Yorkers. If you flip to the next screen, one of the things that we were very careful about was to identify, particularly coming from an agency that was not a social service agency in the way most people thought about it, was to identify what did we mean when we were carving out and creating or defining this field of financial empowerment. And we identified four very specific buckets. One was the financial education and counseling. One is access to mainstream financial products and services. One is asset building, and that can be access to benefits, income, savings. And then the fourth is targeted consumer protections, particularly in the financial services arena. Just one quick additional note on context. When government enters into this work, there is a fascinating pressure as well as a fascinating ability. In terms of ability, we have the ability to leverage politics. When the mayor, or often when a city commissioner wants to grab a microphone or a camera and message to the public, that is an open opportunity. And there are many, obviously, political opportunities that arise over the course of our work. Power is quite literal. And I'll talk about this in a moment, we literally regulate and license and enforce against various practices and industries that are certainly very relevant to those with low incomes. But the pressure is also an interesting one, and one that I've and my colleagues have found very helpful, which is the mandate for success and the mandate for success at scale. Our job is not to figure out how many people we can help. Our job is to help everybody, and we are held accountable. And the money that we spend in thinking about it and in doing it and in talking about whether it succeeds is money that is public tax dollars. So that really fast forwards all of our efforts. And obviously, when you're thinking at scale, as a city must, you design for scale. And so that's been very instructive in the way that we have helped build this field. And when you talk scale in New York, you're talking massive scale. As just one example, we did a survey that showed how many unbanked New Yorkers there were, and the number is 825,000 unbanked New York adults. So that gives you some sense of the challenge and the way that we have to think about these programs. Next slide. Fast forwarding through the last few years, there have been a great many large-scale successes in financial empowerment. I just want to go through a few of them real quickly because I think it's relevant to what it is we're talking about integrating. First, in the financial education and counseling arena, we created, and many of our sister cities created, something called the Financial Education Network, where we used our ability to pull together literally every provider of financial education services, either free or very low cost, and literally put them into a network that can be easily accessed by the public through 311 call systems and websites and what have you. We also ramped it up by creating here in New York a network of financial empowerment centers. These centers were testing whether or not we could deliver one-on-one professional financial counseling at scale in a way that had measurable impacts. The professional part of it was very important. We developed a very rigorous training program for our counselors. That training program is now about to become a 3-credit class at the City University of New York, and we are also developing a graduate-level course for the Social Service School at Columbia. So both undergraduate and graduate, the level of training rises to the level of professional in a very literal way. In the last few years, we have done about 20,000 sessions at these financial empowerment centers and measured a million, I guess I can't say a million to researchers, but dozens and dozens of different factors of success. We have, for example, reduced for our clients over $5.1 million in debt in just 2 years alone, one at a time, by having counselors take a look at what's going on in people's personal financial situation, picking up the phone, calling creditors, working out payment plans, negotiating away penalties, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a very proven approach that we've got here in New York at scale, and some of our sister cities have started to do as well, to literally sit down and improve people's financial circumstances through a single counseling session, a couple of counseling sessions. In terms of access to banking, many of our cities and other cities through the Cities for Financial Empowerment Coalition that you may have seen mentioned on our last slide, of other cities that are doing the same thing. There are a lot of cities that have bank-on programs, which are large-scale outreach programs that are meant to connect mainstream banks and credit unions to those who are unbanked. Other cities, including New York, have also developed very specific banking products that they have used their political weight to leverage and negotiate with banks in order to insert those banking products into particular programs. As a couple of examples, there was a summer youth employment program a couple years ago. Approximately 30,000 kids were going to be paid approximately $50 million over the course of the summer, and we ensured that those payments were made through bank accounts. And for those of the youth who did not have bank accounts, the sign-up program for the summer youth involved a sign-up for a bank account, and that was a very successful way. And we have used our position as government multiple times to intervene into those moments when people are coming for a program, signing up for a program, about to have money dispersed, particularly on a regular basis, from government, and used that moment to leverage very specific and successful banking opportunities with safe banking accounts. Asset building, there's a Save USA program that we started here in New York that we're now seeing replicated through the Obama administration Social Innovation Fund that takes the tax moment when people are literally told by their tax preparer that they're about to receive what is often the biggest payment they're going to get all year, which is the EITC, and it encourages them to split part of their refund before they even get it into a savings product, and if they choose to take it out, they can, but if they leave it there for a year, we've used private dollars to match them 50 cents on the dollar as a reward. That's been an incredibly successful program, showing, as both Professor Slack and Professor Sherrodin have talked about, that given the right opportunity, people will take advantage, even with very low incomes. Our average saver who said yes and succeeded was only making $17,000, and that's in the middle of New York. K to C, there's a program that just started in San Francisco, opening up child savings accounts for children in kindergarten in the public schools. Consumer financial protections, I mentioned before. We literally license debt collectors. We license employment agencies, process servers, used car dealers, etc. You can use licensing to change the way that these industries interact with people. You can use zoning opportunities. You can do targeted enforcement. We go after tax preparers that misrepresent what refund anticipation loans are. For example, we just issued a round of subpoenas to a bunch of debt settlement companies, etc. Now, take all of that, move to the next slide in regard to the perfect storm. When you take all of these successes, they are doing good work on their own, and I've eaten up several of my minutes talking about them, but I think the critical point here is this juncture into social services. So we've developed these programs that have measurable successes, and at the same time, we see in the social services arena this suffering from the decrease of resources, of course, ironically, at this terrible time when people's needs are so great. It is our supposition, and I think that's what's so exciting about talking about this today, that in social services, less is literally less unless you figure out how to innovate. And that's where we come up, if you go to the next slide, with what we think is this innovation of the supervitamin approach to injecting these financial empowerment programs in the right way. The theory being that financial instability is generally the backdrop, as Professor Slack talked about, behind social service client needs. It happens in a few different ways. You have those who either can't fully benefit from the help that they're getting. They don't necessarily know how to make best use of an asset that newly comes into the family, for example. They don't have a bank account. They don't know how to use that money or spend it wisely. A second way is that they are so close to a point of financial instability that the investment in social services can be disrupted or need to be reset because of some minor shock that their finances are unable to absorb, a car that needs a repair, a medical bill, etc., and suddenly everything is discontinued. Or in the third case, as with domestic violence, as Professor Sherrodin mentioned, where the financial factor is one of the primary diagnostic issues of the social innovation. So you have this financial instability as the backdrop. You have social service interventions, which generally don't address that backdrop, as we've discussed. And the idea then is that if you insert the proven financial empowerment services into these interventions, that you will not only speed the success of the primary intervention, but in speeding the success, that you might also save money. We have already been experimenting with the supervitamin idea. In New York, domestic violence is something that has been mentioned several times. The average, from our data that I've seen, the average, usually woman, goes back into an abusive setting 7 times. 44% of our victims say that the top reason they go back is because of financial instability. Take a look at foreclosure prevention. Even if you navigate your way through a mortgage workout, 2/3 of those workouts fail within a couple of months. The reason because of the broader financial instability. You see here several other examples where we are using our government status in order to insert these programs into homeless prevention, jobs initiatives, prisoner reentry, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to the next and last slide, apologize for slightly going over, we have learned a few quick lessons in our efforts to do these integrations and to measure their successes. The first, particularly as Professor Sherrodin was recently talking about, is you want to make sure that you are inserting a professional program. It is important to make a distinction between handing out a brochure or talking generally about a budget as opposed to inserting, for example, a professional counselor or somebody who has been trained in the way that we talked about, like we're doing in Columbia's social service school, where you are literally professionally training people to address these issues in a meaningful way. Second, of course, you have to find an appropriate partner. It seems like it's obvious, but mission alignment can be very helpful. There needs to be a genuine appetite because this is a new way of doing business. Third, you need to identify the right moment. This is really important. I talked about flows of dollars. Those are great access points. I talked about those places where clients are coming to you for the help already. I think that one thing we've also learned is that you do not want to choose crisis moments. When a family is transitioning into a homeless shelter, for example, that's obviously a lousy time to insist upon a financial counseling session or talk about getting them banked. Fourth, you want to institutionalize the integration. I want to underscore this point in particular. Co-location does not work. It is not good enough. You need to formally integrate the intervention into the primary set of services that are being offered. If there is a 4-step process, make the financial empowerment integration, whether it's counseling, banking, whatever it is, step 2 or step 3. Don't make it a handoff. You need to weave it into the program. Otherwise, frankly, it doesn't happen. Behavioral economic factors set in, and it doesn't work. Finally, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, you want to be sure to quantify real results. There are ways to measure the efforts. There are ways to measure the results. And if you're going to make the case for changing the way people do business, and particularly if you're going to be using some of their dollars to do so, you must be able to make that case quickly. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we've got a number of questions. So we're going to start off with one from someone who said, I work with Single Stop USA in New York City. We partner with a number of agencies that provide financial counseling as part of a suite of services offered to low-income customers. What are your thoughts in terms of the pros and cons of classes versus individual counseling as a delivery system to reach customers? So, Christy, you want to start with that one?
Sure. We thought a lot about this when we were designing this particular intervention, and after much thought, we decided that the most efficient way of trying to deliver this type of financial education, financial decision-making intervention was to do so on a one-on-one basis and through intensive training of the workers. We did have the ability to offer classes to families, but most of these families were living in pretty chaotic situations, and the thought of sort of having them show up for a several-hour class when this may not be the highest thing on their list of priorities to resolve, we sort of presumed that wouldn't work as well. So this wasn't a question we tested, but a lot of these interventions took place in the families' homes. Whenever there was an opportunity to educate or to assist a family with decision making, the worker wanted to be prepared and ready to do so on the spot.
Margaret or Jonathan, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I can jump in real quickly. In our research anyway, working with families who are trying to save, there's a great range in their responses to this question. And I think what that implies is that probably we need a diversity of approaches. But I think given the kinds of circumstances that Christy's talking about, Commissioner Mintz just talked about, the one-to-one works well in the beginning, but then when there are substantive topics, once people are engaged, then they find classes and workshops to be particularly useful.
This is Jonathan. I would just agree and just add that I think we've all learned so much from the behavioral economics field, and I think that even the best of classes can only encourage people to either go apply the information if they are willing to take that step and able to take that step, or to convince them to go do something specific, and then you have to rely upon the hope that they in fact go do that. We have found that while there's a real value to sort of priming the pump, I think in a way that sometimes classes can do, to sort of flip the equation from Professor Schrod's perspective, which I also thought was interesting, we are finding that these individual counseling sessions are leading to immediate and literal and quantifiable results. And I think that in an era of dwindling resources, I think we need to jump, and increasing trouble, I think we need to jump right to it as often as possible.
Great. Well, that actually leads into another question that was submitted, is how do we begin to quantify the results of our financial education classes? So any tips or examples of that?
Well, I think, this is Jonathan, I think that if the question is specific to classes, that is a very difficult question and one that has plagued the financial education and asset building field for a long time. I think that even once you move beyond how many people are sitting in the chairs to how many people can prove that they learned something at the end of the class, I still think you are engaged, and forgive me, in an academic exercise about what people learned. And from government's perspective, and I know from everyone on the phone's perspective, the question isn't what can you learn, the question is how quickly can you literally help people. I think that if the question were broadened to how can you quantify whether professional financial counseling makes a difference, we have had tremendous success, and I urge people to take a look at a couple of the links in our presentation. We have had tremendous success in measuring where people are when they come in and where people are when they go. We are looking at their debt levels. We are looking at whether or not they're banked. We are looking at their credit scores. You can, when you are delivering professional services and holding people to those outcomes, the providers to the outcomes, you can quantify what the outcomes are for your clients. And as I say, in just a couple of years, we have literally helped reduce debt, over $5 million, a couple thousand at a time getting on the telephone. It's a very quantifiable approach.
Great, thank you. A popular question coming in is, have you encountered resistance from any workers integrating these new approaches, services into their existing work? How do you address that? And then also with the idea of public funding streams already having numerous reporting requirements, and this some staff may view as something additional to their work, how do you really address this?
I think the first question about the resistance, so this was a unique situation for us. It was an experimental evaluation, which I neglected to say, and La Crosse County actually volunteered to be the site for this intervention. And so there wasn't resistance to doing this kind of intervention. I think it really was more about the comfort level with delivering this type of intervention. We spent a lot of time trying to come up with an effective way to sort of relay this information to workers. And I think one of the mistakes that we made as the research and evaluation team is sort of delivering too much at once and not sort of delivering enough shots in the arm along the way. But workers were very good about letting us know, if there was something they weren't understanding or something that wasn't working well. So we were able to have that back and forth along the way. I think workers are open to this type of intervention. We work with a larger network of community response programs. And I will say in the very beginning, there was resistance to even asking about economic issues with some of the sites. But that quickly turned as people realized it was an effective way, an effective hook for a lot of families to talk about the stresses in that arena. I think it is more about the comfort level and needing to find an effective way to deliver the training to this type of staff.
This is Margaret. I would just add to what Christy said that this has been our experience as well, that the discomfort usually comes from not knowing how to do the work, and talking directly about money with people can be a difficult thing to do, and many clients come in very reluctant, many times because they feel ashamed of their financial situation, and that can be a challenge for individual workers. And I would just add that I think we must begin in institutions like mine and Christie's. We need to be teaching this in the schools where family support workers are being trained. And then from a policy perspective, this is an additional requirement. It's a real issue. This is an issue in teaching also where they're being asked to do financial education, that there has to be policy shift to help support workers in the work that they're undertaking, like the kind of thing that's happening in New York.
This is Jonathan. I would just add on the resistance issue, pulling back from the individual providers with just a reminder that there are different ways to do this integration, by the way. One is to train the primary intervention professionals. The other way is to subcontract for the other professionals and weave them into the process that I mentioned. So there are two ways to do it. We have seen resistance not at the individual worker level, which was discussed, but more at the institutional level. There are those who say, and this is a very common reaction at the beginning, not, oh, that's a good idea or that's not a good idea, but instead they say, oh, we're already doing that. The other thing is people will, in cities like New York, they'll say, well, we don't have room for another counselor. So there can be different kinds of resistance, which is one of the reasons that I think if you can prove this work, then you need to build it into the funding streams. And then in terms of the funding, I just go back to our basic theory. The money is dwindling. And that means people are going to get less help. And if you recognize that they need more help, and if you recognize that this is the backdrop, as I was discussing earlier, of so much of the problem, then I think you need to innovate in this way. And so sometimes vitamins are a little bit hard to swallow, but I believe it is the way toward not just having less mean less.
So there was another part to this question about other measures and accountability measures that family support agencies may already be required to report on, and how does this get effectively integrated on top of these other demands? And I do think that's a very fair question. I mean, these are often families that are dealing with pretty tremendous problems and multiple problems. And to ask workers to add sort of another layer of an intervention that they're uncomfortable delivering is a lot to ask. And one of the goals of the intervention that I spoke about today is really to try to isolate the effect of just delivering this type of intervention around economic stressors. Because if we're able to show, and we don't yet have the final results, so there were a couple questions on whether this intervention has been shown to be effective, so that there's more on that to come. But if we find it does have an impact and it's able to buy some level of prevention, that's a pretty compelling, that could be a pretty compelling finding for a lot of different types of family support service agencies doing prevention work. And I think that might be a convincing start to making this part of the package in a more systematic way.
Great. Another question is about the measurement and the time frame being used to measure change. So, Jonathan, maybe you'd like to start with that about the families that have been worked with. Is this, 6 months or a year? And also, when the workers are working with the families, are they addressing additional challenges and crises that are occurring or ongoing?
So, in our work that's not integrated, in the actual financial empowerment centers where people are coming in for the training, which I'll address first, the feedback and the results is often instantaneous. I think about 2/3 of our clients only come in once. So at the end of that session, we are literally able to say the counselor picked up the phone, called the 3 people to whom they owed money, got them to renegotiate the debt, and now rather than owing $10,000, they owe $6,000. Boom, we just saved that person $4,000 plus the continual drowning in interest and fees. So there are very real ways to measure those interventions. When they are integrated, as everyone has noted, obviously there's something more complicated going on, which is why it's important that you pick the right moment to insert the empowerment integration, whether it's a counseling or banking or whatever it is. But again, the financial empowerment part of this, in some ways, is simpler because it's so concrete. If somebody's about to receive money and you have them receive that money into a new bank account that you open for them, rather than a check that they're going to bring to a check casher, you have an instant success. Now, obviously, it's more complicated. You want to keep delivering education so they know how to use the account, et cetera. But there are ways to have very literal, early, almost immediate in many cases, interventions. And then you get some that are coming more often for more complicated problems, and you continue to test.
Great. Well, with that, we're going to actually need to wrap this up. I just want to ask Christy, Margaret, Jonathan, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
And I think the discussants would also agree with this. I think this is a topic that we can no longer sort of sideline in this world of family support service agencies, and experimenting with these different models and approaches for integrating this in a more systematic way. I just think this is the direction we have to go.
This is Jonathan. I just definitely want to thank everyone for the opportunity, and this has been very interesting for me as well. I agree absolutely with Professor Sheridan that that the current times demand this kind of thinking and these kinds of efforts. The clients that people are seeing need their financial instability addressed, either because of the direct or the indirect relationship to what it is you are trying to help them with. And I think that this question of the financial stability and the measurable ways in which you can integrate these services offers great opportunities. As I say, there are many cities that are already doing this and doing this at some scale. And we remain open to looking to other ways that we can engage the research community at the same time in order to make the case for broader policy.
This is Margaret. I want to thank you as well. I think this discussion is one of hopefully many more that come. I hope that we can we all have access to the questions that came in that didn't get addressed. I think that would be interesting for those of us who are working in the field, trying to respond to the kinds of questions that practitioners and others are asking.
Yes, I'll share those with the group, and I would like to thank Christy and Margaret and Jonathan and also all of our participants. We really appreciate all of the feedback and the questions. The slides of today's presentations will be at http://cfs.wisc.edu by the end of business today, and we will post the entire archived webinar within 1 week of today. And I'd just like to let you know that our next webinar is on Tuesday, September 13th, 1 p.m. Central, and Stephanie Moulton from Ohio State University will present financial planning for home buyers. So everyone will receive a registration email for that as well. So thank you and have a great day.